The Department of Justice has released more than 3 million additional pages of documents related to its investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. It marks the largest batch of files shared to date. The documents put out on Friday shed new light on Epstein's relationships with several prominent figures from the U.S. and U.K. They also contain a significant number of uncorroborated tips to law enforcement. The DOJ says it redacted images of all women except Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, in order to protect survivors' identities. They also withheld documents containing their personal or medical information, as well as depictions of child sexual abuse and material showing death or violence. DOJ officials indicated this is likely the final major release of Epstein files, despite federal prosecutors initially identifying 6 million pages that comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Adding officials had erred on the side of overcollection and later decided to release only half that amount. You know, that's just one of the questions that lawmakers are going to have, including Democrat Ro Khanna, demanding the full release of these files in accordance with the law. Watch.
They did do a release that was significant. I mean, this is the most documents that we have seen released so far in history, but it is not good enough. If we don't get the remaining files, if we do not get the remaining 302 forms, the remaining prosecution memo from 2019, and if the survivors are not happy, then Thomas Massie and I are prepared to move on impeachment or contempt.
So there's getting the files, and then there's the natural next question of what's in them. And specifically, who is it about? The New York Times reports it found more than 5,300 files with references to President Trump in the millions of Epstein documents released. The pages include unverified tips submitted to the FBI alleging misconduct by Trump and Epstein, which agents summarized last summer without corroborating evidence. Then there's also interview notes from Epstein survivors, which describe interactions involving Trump, including one account of Epstein bringing a survivor to Mar-a-Lago, though the notes here do not allege misconduct by Trump. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche also said in an interview yesterday the DOJ looked into sexual misconduct allegations against Trump in connection with Epstein, but didn't find credible information to merit further investigation. Trump, of course, was a friend of Epstein's until the early 2000s, he says, a relationship that he has since minimized. Trump has also denied any wrongdoing. It's a lot for us to start off with this Monday morning. Former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg, thankfully is here with us to break it down. I want to start because we just discussed a little bit of what we did get from the DOJ. But what about what we didn't? You know, I've been listening to Congressman Ro Khanna and others say they want these FBI 302s, which are basically victim interviews. Can you talk about why they would want that and what else you were wondering, hey, why isn't this in here?
Allie, we want to see the victim statements of the FBI. I mean, that's really important. Also, there was a 60-count indictment that was drafted up by prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida that was shelved. And instead, they cut what many consider to be a sweetheart deal with Epstein. So we want to see that. How about internal memos from the federal prosecutors within the Southern District of Florida and the Southern District of New York? How about internal FBI memos and names of unindicted co-conspirators? These are all really relevant. This is what the survivors want. This is what even the MAGA base wants. But we haven't seen that. In fact, there were some releases by the Epstein estate, photos, and remember that bawdy birthday card that Trump allegedly wrote? We haven't seen that either. So there are things out there, and the DOJ is leaning into what's called deliberative process and work product privileges to withhold these documents. But the Epstein Files Transparency Act does not permit those exceptions to be used as an excuse to withhold the documents. And so that's why there's going to be a standoff between Congress and the Trump administration. And I think the only way to force the hand is to go to court, because right now, even though a lot of documents were released, there's still a lot more out there.
Yeah, there's still more out there, and I think that you're right to point out one of the obvious inconsistencies, and it's also why I think the congressional investigation through the Oversight Committee, where they've gotten some of those documents from the Epstein estate, is a really important corollary to what we're watching play out through the law mechanism that compelled the DOJ to turn over these documents in the first place. Remember, they were under subpoena from over the summer by the Oversight Committee, and that's not what got the compulsion of the documents. It was the law that was passed in bipartisan fashion and signed by Trump. Before I get to the explanation that the DOJ might offer here as to why they are defying the spirit of the law and not releasing things like that body letter allegedly from Trump. I also want to drill down on the fact that in those victim statements, right, that is one of the things that lawmakers have said to me. We have a sense of what we will be missing here because the victims are able to say, no, I know in some cases who did these horrible things to me, right? I mean, that's one of the ways to solve for a negative and to understand what we don't have, right?
Correct. And the Trump administration, as I said, is saying that there are work product privileges, but they're also leaning in to the legitimate excuse, which is in the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which is that they don't have to turn over documents that are related to an ongoing criminal investigation. So they're saying, we don't want to give up these victim statements because we're investigating. But are they really? I mean, is the investigation active? Is it genuine? They said they were investigating Democrats, but Bill Clinton's name and pictures were produced throughout this whole process. So I'm not sure if that investigation is being used as a way to withhold documents that should not be withheld. But that's a problem within the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which is riddled with loopholes and has no enforcement mechanism. So Congress, especially when the Democrats take control in November, which I think is going to happen, may want to pass another law because the one they passed already is not seeming to be adequate.
And again, you mentioned that Democrats could take control of Congress and then push forward another law like that. I also think it's important to recognize the fact that this passed in overwhelming bipartisan fashion after much pressure from Massey and Khanna to put it through a discharge petition, a few Republicans crossing party lines to basically force leadership's hands to get this to the House floor, and then watching it pass through the House and the Senate. Again, overwhelmingly bipartisan, signed by Trump. I guess ultimately, what do you think ends up happening next? I always look for the tangibles. Is the next thing that Massey and Khanna file some kind of lawsuit? Is the next thing that DOJ finally hands over its explanation of why it's redacting certain things or leaving certain things out? I mean, what is the next tangible thing you're looking for?
The DOJ has to turn over the explanation. They're already late in doing so, and they're going to do that. But I think the next big step is for members of Congress to consider filing a lawsuit to compel the documents to be turned over, maybe to get a special master. You know, they tried to do that already, but they failed because they tried to piggyback on the Ghislaine Maxwell grand jury transcript judge. That was inappropriate. Those members of Congress did not have standing. That judge at the time was not dealing with this issue, and so they went to the wrong court. They need to go to the right court, which is file a lawsuit on this question alone, or pass a new law so that they could force the hand. Remember, this law has no enforcement mechanism, so the Trump administration can thumb their nose at Congress, and there's very little that Congress can do about it.